June 1, 2004. Lunchtime at a primary school in Sasebo, a port city in Nagasaki Prefecture. An 11-year-old girl asks her classmate to come with her to an empty room down the hall. The classmate is 12. She trusts her. She says yes. Minutes later, a teacher finds the 11-year-old standing in the corridor, alone, soaked in blood. "I did a very bad thing," the girl says quietly. She doesn't run. She doesn't cry. She doesn't make excuses. She just stands there and confesses. What happened in that empty classroom would shock Japan to its core. Not because it was the work of a hardened criminal, but because the person who did it was a child. An ordinary-seeming child who had been coming apart, quietly and invisibly, for months. And the thing that set it off was a few lines of text in an online chat room. And then the internet got involved, and the story got stranger still. It was a Tuesday in early summer. At Okubo Elementary School in Higashiokubocho, Sasebo, 6th graders were finishing their lunch. Satomi Mitarai was 12 years old and in the same class as the girl who would kill her. They knew each other well. They had spent time together, shared a digital presence on the social sites popular among Japanese schoolchildren at the time. During the lunch break, Girl A, as the perpetrator is legally referred to under Japan's strict juvenile privacy laws, approached Satomi and asked if she'd come with her to a study room further down the building. There was no reason for Satomi to refuse. She went. The study room was empty. Girl A closed the curtains. She had a box cutter, the kind used in Japanese classrooms for craft projects, slim and ordinary. She told Satomi to sit down. Then she moved behind her and slashed her throat. The wound was deep. Reports describe a laceration nearly 10 centimeters wide, drawn across the throat from left to right. Satomi tried to fight back. She flailed her arms desperately, trying to make Girl A stop. But Girl A kept cutting at Satomi's wrists and forearms. And according to investigators, she waited long enough to be sure Satomi wasn't getting up before she walked out of the room. Satomi Mitarai was 12 years old. She did not survive. Girl A walked back down the corridor. She was covered in blood. A teacher stopped her immediately. And this is the part that haunts people. She didn't run, didn't lie, didn't try to explain it away as an accident. She looked at her teacher and said she had done a very bad thing. Police arrived and took her in. She was cooperative throughout. She confirmed what she had done. She told investigators she had planned it. She had thought about it in advance, she said, and she chose the box cutter specifically because she believed it was reliable. That word, planned, is what made the case impossible to dismiss as a moment of panic. This was premeditated by an 11-year-old. The roots of the conflict were online, and they dated back only days before the murder. In late May 2004, a friction had developed between the two girls on Cafesta, a popular Japanese social networking site of that era, something like a personal homepage crossed with a chat room, widely used among middle school-aged children. What exactly was written is a matter of differing accounts, but the core of it is this. Satomi had made mocking comments about Girl A online. She reportedly called her a buriko, a Japanese term for someone who puts on an exaggerated fake air of cuteness or innocence. Calling someone a buriko is essentially calling them a phony. It said there were also comments, either by Satomi or by others in their group, mocking Girl A's appearance and weight. These weren't posted privately. They were there for classmates to read. Girl A had not let it pass. She reportedly broke into Satomi's personal website and defaced it. And her behavior at school had been escalating in ways that, in hindsight, were clear warning signs, punching and kicking classmates, and, this detail is significant, she had reportedly brought a knife to school a full month before the murder. Teachers and classmates had noticed the behavior. Whether anyone understood what it might be building toward is another question. At home, according to accounts from school officials, she was under pressure. Her parents had pulled her off the school basketball team, something she was reportedly passionate about, to force her to focus on academic study. Whether this contributed to her deteriorating state of mind is debated, but it removed the one structured outlet she had. Girl A was also, it emerged after the fact, deeply drawn to dark and violent media. She maintained a personal website that was dedicated to horror content. She was a fan of The Red Room, a Japanese flash animation horror clip that was circulating widely among schoolchildren in 2004, a creepypasta-style story in which a voice asks if you've seen The Red Room. She had read the novel Battle Royale and seen its film adaptation, a story in which middle schoolers are sent to an island and forced to kill each other for the entertainment of the state. The presiding judge in her case would later say that she had ballooned her aggressive ego, affected by horror novels she had immersed herself in. That's a strong interpretation. Violent media doesn't by itself turn a child into a killer, and that claim should be held lightly. But the picture that emerges is of a girl who was already deeply immersed in images of violence, already isolated from her usual outlets, and now carrying a very personal, very digital grievance. The Kefesta comments were the match that lit it. After her arrest, Girl A was examined extensively by psychological evaluators. She was subsequently diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, what is now referred to as autism spectrum disorder. This detail matters, but it needs to be handled with care. Asperger syndrome is not a cause of violence. The vast majority of people on the autism spectrum never harm anyone, and it would be both wrong and harmful to suggest otherwise. But what the diagnosis pointed toward was a way of processing the social world that can make certain dynamics acutely painful, particularly the invisible social codes that neurotypical children navigate more intuitively. For someone who struggles to pass the unspoken grammar of social life, a public insult, one that's typed out in a chat room where others can see it, where it can be read and reread, can register not as passing rudeness, but as a verdict. Permanent. Official. Defining, it said that being called a bariko by someone she considered a friend felt to Girl A like a profound betrayal. Not a casual slight between schoolgirls. A condemnation, and the fact that it was written down, visible to others, shareable, permanent in the way that digital text is permanent, that may have given it a weight that a spoken word in a school hallway might not have carried. But the question of why she responded with lethal violence is one that no single factor answers. Most people who feel humiliated by a peer, including most people on the autism spectrum, do not kill. What happened here appears to have been a particular and terrible convergence, a growing pattern of escalating aggression that nobody fully intervened on, an academic pressure that removed her only healthy outlet, an immersion in violent themes, a trigger that felt, in her processing of it, like the final unforgivable betrayal. None of those things individually predicts murder. Together, in this particular child, in this particular moment, they produced one. What makes the Sasebo slashing distinct, even setting aside the age of the perpetrator, is how much of it lived in the digital world before it became physical. In 2004, social media as we now know it didn't exist. But there was Kefesta, there were personal websites, there were message boards, and children were using all of them to conduct their social lives in ways that adults barely understood yet. The conflict that ended Satomi Mitarai's life didn't erupt in a schoolyard or at lunch. It grew slowly and digitally in a chat room, in typed words that could be saved and revisited and shown to others. This is a particular cruelty that digital life introduced and that we still haven't fully grappled with. A spoken insult in a corridor fades with the day. A posted one doesn't. It lives on the screen. It can be read again at midnight, in the quiet of a bedroom, when there's no one around to put it in proportion. It accumulates. What happened after the murder entered another dimension of the digital world, one that nobody anticipated and that remains deeply uncomfortable to discuss. In the days following the crime, Japanese television broadcast a class photograph, and in it, viewers could see a girl wearing a sweatshirt from the University of Nevada, Reno. Users on 2 Channel, Japan's vast anonymous image board, the cultural precursor to later platforms, went to work analyzing the image. By June 18, 2004, they had identified a name. They began sharing it publicly, circumventing the legal protections designed to keep the juvenile offender anonymous. And then some of them began creating fan art. The girl became known as Nevada Tan, Tan being a playful, childlike version of the honorific Chan, often used affectionately. People drew illustrations of her, cute images, some of them deliberately smeared with blood, some of them showing her holding a box cutter. There were original artworks, tribute pages, forums dedicated to her. An 11-year-old who had just killed her classmate was being aestheticized, being turned into a Mo character, a figure of internet fandom. It's a dimension of this case that resists easy framing. It says something about the early internet's capacity for detachment, its ability to process even a child's murder through the lens of entertainment, of imagery, of fandom. Satomi Mitarai's death had barely had time to register before part of the internet had already converted the person who caused it into content. The family of a murdered 12-year-old had to contend not just with their loss, but with the fact that their daughter's killer was circulating as an internet figure. The case reignited a fierce debate in Japan about its age of criminal responsibility. It had already been lowered once, from 16 to 14, following the 1997 Kobe child murders perpetrated by a 14-year-old who called himself Sakakibara. Sasebo pushed the question further. What do you do when the perpetrator is younger than 14 and the crime is planned, targeted, and lethal? The rehabilitation model remained in place, but its adequacy was argued then, and is still argued now. On September 15, 2004, the Nagasaki family court ruled to send girl A to a juvenile reform facility in Tochigi Prefecture. Because she was 11 years old, criminal prosecution was never an option under Japanese law. The family court system, which operates on principles of rehabilitation rather than punishment, handled everything. The court handed down an initial 2-year commitment. In September 2006, following another round of psychological evaluation, that term was extended by an additional 2 years. In May 2008, authorities announced they would not seek any further extension. She was released. That timeline, 4 years in an institution, is not nothing. But for the family of Satomi Mitarai, who was 12 years old and should have grown up, 4 years doesn't map onto a life. After her release, very little is known publicly, which is by design. Japanese law strictly protects the privacy of rehabilitated juvenile offenders. Their records are sealed, their identities legally shielded. It's reported that in 2013, her family relocated to an undisclosed location so she could live under a new name. She was in her early 20s then. By now, she would be in her early 30s. What the Sasebo slashing leaves behind isn't just grief for a girl who should still be here. It leaves a series of questions we are still figuring out how to ask. What do we do when children commit crimes that an adult framework, prisons, trials, public records, was designed to address? Does rehabilitation work? For whom and on what timeline? And what happens when the social world moves online, when the words children say to each other are no longer private, no longer forgotten after the school day ends, no longer spoken only where adults might notice? What do we owe children who live their friendships and their conflicts in digital spaces where nothing disappears? These questions don't have clean answers. But Satomi Mitarai was 12. She deserved a future. Understanding how she lost it is the least we can do. Thank you for watching. If this case stays with you, if it makes you think about what it means that so much of childhood now happens on screens, subscribe and stay with us, because the cases that are hardest to understand are the ones we most need to.